Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Please take your seats. Thank you. Thank you very much. If you could just take your seats, we'll kick off this wonderful day ahead of us. So once again, good morning, and welcome to this third edition of the World Reconstruction Conference. On behalf of the European Commission, the 79 African, Caribbean, and Pacific states, the World Bank, the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, and the United Nations Development Programme. I'm Shada Islam. I'm Director for Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe, which is an independent think tank based here in Brussels. And I'm delighted because I'm going to moderate this opening session of this conference today. It really is wonderful to see so many of you here today. I don't know how many you are, but you filled up the room, and it's amazing to feel the buzz from here. So it's a very eclectic crowd. You are experts and practitioners from governments, from international organizations, from NGOs, academia, and of course also the private sector. Now, you know that the setup of this third edition of the WRC is rather unique. We're kicking off here at the Square, 2 days of discussions, and then we'll end up at the European Development Days with a lab debate and also a high-level plenary session. That's on the 8th of June. So the speakers will come up to the floor, to the podium very soon, but let me just tell you, why are we here? Why am I here? I'm really interested in these issues of building back better. It's about resilient recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction, but in a new and different manner from in the past. It's also about implementing priority 4 of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Now, we know that in this complex and very challenging world, we have to work together to tackle 21st century challenges. We cannot do it alone. No country can do it alone, no international organization, and certainly not any organization. We cannot always prevent disasters or conflicts, but what we can do is work together after or before even in prevention to try and make sure that we recover in a resilient and sustained manner. That's the challenge that's been taken up by the tripartite partnership of the World Bank, the European Union, and the United Nations. And these 2 days are going to be actually about implementation of the priority 4. And the panel that I will be moderating this morning is on the importance of partnerships and cooperation. How do we work together? What can we do best together? And it's also about learning lessons from past experiences. So joining me on the podium are, and I'm going to call you out, ladies and gentlemen, please join me here on the stage, Monique Parria, Director General for Humanitarian Aid and Civilian Protection. Please come up to the stage. Thank you very much, Monique. Mr. Cyril Muller, Vice President of the World Bank. His Excellency Ambachew Mikonen from Ethiopia. I'm not sure you're here yet. Oh, wonderful. Brilliant. Thank you, Excellency. Wonderful to see you. Mr. Aviol Florent, Minister for Planning and External Cooperation from Haiti. Please join us here on the stage as well. Barbara Pesque-Montero, Director of the UN-UNDP Brussels Representation Office. Please come up, Barbara. Mr. Vivanu Ganasunu, my friend from the ACP, Assistant Secretary General. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Swarnim Wagle, member of the National Planning Commission of Nepal. Welcome as well. So just some rules of the game. We're going to kick off with a video message recorded by Christos Stylianiadis from the European Commission. He's European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management. Then we'll have a speech by Cyril Muller from the World Bank. And then I'm going to interrogate our panelists on some of the issues we think are very important about implementation, working together, and also lessons learned. So could we please have the video message from the Commissioner?
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's with great pleasure that I address the opening of the third edition of the World Reconstruction Conference. But I sincerely regret that I cannot be with you today. I would like to especially thank the World Bank, the United Nations Development Programme, and the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group of States for our collaboration. For the third time, this event is the product of strong cooperation among our organizations. Today's conference can guide us to achieve better resilient recovery in order to build back better, to reduce the risks of future disasters. We need to advance this agenda in the face of complex, cascading or repeated disasters and conflicts. We've seen this many times before, and recently with the earthquakes in Ecuador, Nepal, and Italy, droughts and famine in the Horn of Africa, or forest fires destroying parts of Chile and countries in Southern Europe. Our citizens, our societies, and our economies have learned to come back from shocks and will continue to do so in the future. Their resilience is vital. My messages here today reflect the outcomes of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Last week, I was in Cancun at the Global Platform on Disaster Reduction. I would like to make 3 key points which are relevant to this conference. First, strengthening resilience and reducing risk makes economic sense. Building back better reduces the burden and cost of reconstruction. Second, we must better understand risk if we want to anticipate the impacts of future shocks. Knowledge, planning, education, and communication are central elements. Finally, we must work hand in hand with the private sector, from prevention to recovery and reconstruction. We want to share our experience at European level to support recovery and reconstruction. Let me name a few. The European Union has established a solidarity fund to support the rehabilitation and recovery efforts of European countries affected by disasters. We are enhancing disaster resilience through funding of research and innovation, requiring risk-informed and climate-proof investments. Through the EU structural funds, we support disaster risk management capacities in the EU and in our neighborhood. We seek to enhance strategic complementarity between humanitarian and development action. This is done through resilience approaches. Our support in the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, Haiti, Nepal, or Bangladesh in the current time are good examples. The variety of subjects you will discuss here in Brussels illustrates the complexity of the reconstruction process. From cultural heritage, education, health, and urban issues, to engaging with the private sector and strengthening the humanitarian development nexus, conflict sensitivity, and many, many more. During the conference, you'll have an opportunity to share experiences, lessons learned, and new ideas on promoting resilience through post-crisis recovery. I strongly encourage all stakeholders to continue cooperating and coordinating their recovery and reconstruction efforts. We must continue on the dynamic path created by Sendai we must implement our commitments. International agreements on sustainable development, urban development, and especially in today's landscape, environmental protection are important signposts on that path. Dear colleagues, only by joining forces we can build a resilient future. I wish you a successful conference.
Mr. Cyril Muller, would you like to come up to the lectern, please?
Thank you very much, Shada. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third World Reconstruction Conference. Thank you for joining us today for these 3 days in Brussels to dive into the topic of post-crisis recovery. In the first conferences, we made great strides in issues around post-disaster assessments and reconstruction. The task ahead of us is today, for the next 3 days, in the post-crisis recovery area. Crises and threats are all too common, and they've become common themes in development. We're facing a complex web of challenges that threaten to undermine our efforts towards social and economic progress for the world's most vulnerable populations. We're seeing increasingly visible impacts of climate change and extreme weather. We're seeing growing disaster risk in rapidly expanding urban areas, fast-moving pandemics. We're also seeing protracted conflicts causing mass forced displacement, increased food insecurity, and the erosion of entire ecosystems. It may be overwhelming to consider all of these threats at once, but it is important to see the connections between them, how each can influence or exacerbate each other. More than 26 million people every year are forced into poverty from extreme weather events alone. A changing climate is also driving food insecurity, which can destabilize fragile states and lead to violent conflict. Forced displacement driven by conflict leaves then many without access to basic services like healthcare, leading to increased risk of disease and the crowding of families into poorly planned communities that then are vulnerable as well to disaster risks. As the cycle continues, leading to unspeakable human suffering, we see the same causes leading to the same effect. We desperately need approaches that can cut through these different challenges and bring us closer to resilient, prosperous, and peaceful societies. At the World Bank Group, we believe that one such approach is through well-planned and well-executed recovery. What do we mean by this? We recognize that a crisis situation offers the opportunity to build back better and reduce future risks. When done well, recovery efforts can enable communities to bounce back quickly and emerge from crisis stronger and more resilient to future shocks. Such recovery requires careful and strategic planning well before crisis strikes. This means having institutions, policies, laws, and financial mechanisms in place so that recovery can begin swiftly. It is equally important that recovery involves doing things right and doing the right thing. In other words, recovery must be both efficient and effective. At the World Bank Group, we are committed to helping countries achieve both by emphasizing the need for preparedness in recovery planning, as well as the adoption of best practices from international experience. For example, our recently announced Global Crisis Response Platform helps governments devise sound financial planning and risk management before a disaster strikes, so that they're not scrambling for funds or the necessary institutions in the wake of a crisis. I have to confess that having been somebody attending conferences, I attended the Second World Conference, and I also attended Sendai. I asked my colleagues this morning, can you give me an example of one country that have put in place the resilience, the recovery mechanisms and institutions in place without having gone through first a disaster? And my colleagues, maybe they're wrong, could not find an example. And I think part of our work in this conference is to also focus on building awareness and ownership in countries that have not yet been struck by disaster or crisis. We've made progress, and I want to acknowledge that we've partnered the World Bank with organizations like UNDP and the EU to develop recovery guidelines to ensure countries are ready to respond when disaster strikes, and together we've performed more than 50 post-disaster needs assessments around the globe and informed recovery programs. In the last 5 years alone, the World Bank has committed more than $5 billion in disaster recovery efforts in 39 countries. This represents our strong commitment to mainstreaming resilient recovery. And we're beginning to see promising results. Indonesia enacted disaster risk management laws, created a national disaster management agency, and increased its disaster risk management budget by 500% in just 5 years. This has helped reduce risk, increase resilience, and provide support to communities. In Lao PDR, after multiple devastating flood events that brought together more than $1 billion in losses, we helped the government reorganize its disaster risk management agency, enabling the government to mobilize resources and coordinate across ministries during disaster. I will be joined on the panel today by colleagues who actually are practitioners, and I'm very keen to hear from them on their own practice in this area. But investment in recovery go beyond natural disaster risk alone. In 2014, the World Bank and its partners used satellite imagery, social media analytics, and other data sources to estimate about $4 billion in damages across 6 Syrian cities. I know that one of the themes of the conference is also to see how can we apply recovery in fragile and conflict situations. These assessments, these new tools, are helping us all to inform better our engagement in recovery across the world. Our methodologies are increasingly used in conflict situations, such as in Iraq right now. We all understand that these kinds of challenges are connected, and we know solutions can be deployed across these types of crises to better protect vulnerable populations and rebuild battered communities. Solutions like strengthening governance systems, improving lifeline services, diversifying livelihoods, and providing social protection mechanisms are all key elements of solutions. Over the next few days, we will explore these issues in a number of interesting and important individual sessions, and I wish all of us a successful conference and continued progress in taking action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cyril. So you've set the tone for our discussion now, our conversation, if I may say so. We're going to try and focus our panelists on 3 issues: turning words into action, so implementation that Cyril, you spoke about, learning from past mistakes, and we have many who have had mistakes, but also successes and learning from these successes. And then how can we share the best practices that we elucidate today. So I'm going to kick off with you, Monique. European Commission has just recently published the action plan on the implementation of the Sendai framework that we've been talking about. Can you give us a few highlights of this? What are the priorities? What are you going? What tasks have you set yourself?
Thank you very much, Shada. Welcome to everybody. Very happy to be with you today, and I think this will be a great conference. And we have many things that we need to share. Absolutely. On the Sendai framework, we indeed recently published our action plan on the implementation of the Sendai framework. And I would say that when it comes to the priority for enhancing preparedness for effective response on building back better, we see two main drivers for that. One is, and this is what underlines our action plan all across the board, one is that we have to build a better risk-informed approach. So this is absolutely fundamental that we integrate risk knowledge and risk awareness in all our policies. And this is what we have introduced in our action plan to reinforce and support our policies with a better risk information. Secondly, the other driver is that we need to work across sectors and policies and join the dots, if I may say so, between our different policies, be it humanitarian aid, development, but also our environment policy, our structural funds policy, our civil protection policy, research, etc. So that's, I would say, the two main drivers. So the action plan promotes the Build Back Better concept by reinforcing the Build Back Better element in EU guidance on post-disaster risk assessment. Secondly, in integrating climate change adaptation into European standards for infrastructure. And thirdly, in also promoting and using more geospatial information provided by the Copernicus Emergency Management Service, which provides satellite-based mapping during the recovery phase. And this is something we indeed see as more and more used and requested, even by our friends from the United States that requested satellite maps from Copernicus lately when Hurricane Matthew hits the coast of the US. So, and this is also what we always provide as first when we have, for instance, an earthquake in the EU, like in Italy recently. So a disaster, then what I would like to add also is building back better or having the most adequate response when a disaster hits has to be prepared in advance. So the response phase is vital, but the preparedness and the prevention phase is even more important. The better we prepare, the better we have integrated the risk, the more we will be able to face a disaster, to reduce casualties, to reduce the cost also. It was said before, there is an economic cost into that also. And this is what we will want to strive also to have a much better preparedness and prevention approach. Be it inside of the EU, with our main tool for that is the civil protection mechanism, but I'll come back on that later on. And also part of our humanitarian aid budget is also dedicated to disaster, to preparedness and prevention measures. Last thing I would like to say, because I think we need to keep short so that we can have a more interactive discussion. Commissioner Stylianides mentioned the private sector. I think this is also something very important that we want to promote, which is how we can better integrate the private sector into this approach, be it insurance sector. The insurance sector can help in addressing damages very quickly after disaster occurs. It can be internet providers or electronic devices, systems to help in the awareness phase and in the information phase, satellite I mentioned before. So there are a wide range of private sector companies that can be very important and that can help also very much into that. Last, obviously, we mentioned the resilience and the nexus between humanitarian aid and development. It's obvious, and we are actively working on that in the European Commission, and we will also continue and enhance our cooperation with the World Bank and UNDP into that, that when you have to reply with, after a disaster with humanitarian aid, if you don't integrate the lessons learned and what have been the weaknesses in the system that led to the disaster, if you don't integrate that in more long-term development measures, then the same causes will create the same effects afterwards. And that's where the Build Back Better is very crucial, and where we now integrate that into our resilience approach. We will publish a communication on resilience in a week's time on that. And it goes from security to development and humanitarian aid, so that we here again better join the dots, so that we are prepared and we provide the right measures to build back better afterwards and make our societies more resilient. Thank you, Ella.
Thank you, Monique. So a lot being prepared, a lot being done also, but also this question of humanitarian aid. Please, go ahead. Also this question of the tying up or the linking of humanitarian aid and long-term development. I think this question remains on the table, and we really need to get moving on that. So thank you very much for that intervention. From the ACP, Monsieur Dansunu, what are for you, as the 79 ACP countries, right? So coming together on some issues could be a bit of a challenge, but what are the 5 top priorities that you've set yourselves for resilient recovery and reconstruction?
Yes, good morning to all, and I hope it's fine I express myself in French.
I think there's no problem. We have interpretation. Yeah,
We have
interpretation.
headphones. OK, thank you. Oui, encore merci à chacun, messieurs les ministres et chers panélistes, chers participants. C'est bien évidemment pour nous, ACP, une grande joie d'être ici et de pouvoir réitérer un peu ce qui nous a amenés ici dans ce partenariat avec les Nations Unies, le PNUD, la Banque mondiale et l'Union européenne. Un partenariat dans le sens où nous avons, sur la base des ressources que nous avions à disposition pour financer le développement, convenu qu'une grande part allait être mise à disposition pour financer les actions dans le secteur de la résilience et de la prévention des risques. Les priorités qui ont sous-tendu cela, j'allais dire, au premier rang de ces priorités et très loin devant les autres, c'est la cohérence des politiques. Policy coherence. Parce que cela a été dit de différentes manières, mais il est évident pour nous, notamment représentant non seulement des pays pauvres, mais en plus, une grande partie, nous avons 37 des 6 qui sont des pays ACP, nous avons pratiquement 40 PMA qui sont des pays ACP, nous avons 15 pays enclavés qui sont des pays ACP, la plupart d'entre eux étant des pays qui sont dans des eaux désertiques. Il était évident pour nous que si nous ne mettions pas à l'avant de la sensibilisation, de l'action dans le domaine de la prévention et de la gestion des risques, personne mieux que nous-mêmes en tant que victimes ne le ferait. Alors la cohérence des politiques, parce que j'aime à dire que ce genre de conférence, il faudrait ne plus y amener des ministres sectoriels, mais des ministres des Finances et du Plan. Parce que ce dont il s'agit en réalité, c'est de repenser tout notre développement. Nous n'avons pas les moyens d'agir lorsque la catastrophe est là. C'est trop tard. Ce qu'il faut, c'est se préparer comme il faut. Donc la cohérence des politiques, c'est se dire, lorsqu'on fait une politique d'urbanisme, il faut commencer déjà à penser résilience. Lorsqu'on fait une politique agricole, il faut penser résilience. Lorsqu'on fait une politique dans le domaine de la santé, il faut aussi penser résilience. Donc c'est ce genre de message que nous avons en priorité et qui est la première des politiques, qui en fait est une notion de bonne gouvernance. Parce que lorsque les ressources sont rares, il faut savoir les utiliser au mieux. Les utiliser au mieux, c'est aussi savoir mieux planifier là où elles doivent aller. Le deuxième élément de priorité que nous pourrons mettre en avant, cela a été dit, c'est la sensibilisation. Comment est-ce qu'on peut mieux comprendre qu'il faut se préparer pour le risque lorsqu'on n'a pas été touché? Je pense que nos collègues de la Banque mondiale l'ont dit. C'est humain. C'est humain, même lorsqu'on paie des assurances pour les voitures, on est toujours un peu réticent à payer lorsqu'on n'a jamais souffert pour la santé. Il faut que cela devienne une obligation, pas seulement une obligation légale, mais morale et politique. Donc notre rôle en tant que groupe ACP, parce que nous avons cette possibilité de pouvoir nous adresser à des niveaux directs, au niveau des gouvernements, au niveau de la société civile, au niveau du secteur privé, directement à 79 pays. Et nous pensons qu'il était important que nous prenions cela à corps, que nous puissions faire cette sensibilisation-là et montrer par des exemples patents à d'autres membres du groupe ACP que cela peut vous arriver demain. Personne n'est à l'abri. Il ne s'agit pas seulement d'être une petite île au milieu de l'océan, mais on peut, dans des grands États, au niveau du désert, avoir d'autres catastrophes. On peut, dans des autres pays, avoir des inondations. Donc, tout peut arriver à tout moment. Et nous avons fait, il y a quelques années de cela, un compendium des risques que nous avons développé avec nos partenaires de la Banque mondiale pour vraiment identifier et montrer que les risques de catastrophes naturelles sont partout et potentiels. Le troisième élément peut-être de priorité que nous pouvons mettre en avant, c'est une fois que nous avons fait la sensibilisation, c'est adopter les stratégies. Et là, c'est également lié à la cohérence, mais c'est transformer cette cohérence, cette sensibilisation en éléments concrets. Développer au niveau de chaque pays une stratégie qui permet de faire rentrer tous les acteurs. On a parlé du secteur privé, et ce n'est pas évident que lorsque nous travaillons dans des pays, qu'on fasse venir l'ordre des architectes, par exemple, leur expliquer que dans un pays, lorsqu'on doit faire la construction, voilà ce à quoi cela doit ressembler, voilà comment on doit le faire, et cela suppose aussi qu'il y ait une entente, un dialogue avant que la réglementation soit mise en place. Un quatrième élément il est quatrième, mais qui est peut-être un peu plus important que les deux autres dont j'ai parlé après la cohérence des politiques, c'est le capacity building, le développement des capacités. Parce que les interventions se feront, les stratégies se développeront, mais lorsque cela n'est pas incorporé dans le système en tant que tel, pas seulement sur des actions ponctuelles, mais dans le continu, dans le long terme. Il faut qu'on arrive à développer des capacités au niveau national, au niveau régional, parce que notre credo aussi au niveau du groupe ACP, c'est qu'on n'est pas forcément obligé de tout faire au niveau national. Il y a des structures qui sont disponibles au niveau régional, qui sont outillées, qui permettent aussi de mettre en commun les ressources, qui sont capables de développer des compétences et d'avoir sur place, sur site, des capacités qu'on peut mettre au service des pays qui sont couverts par la région. Et le dernier élément, peut-être dont je peux parler, c'est aussi une politique peut-être qui soit guidée par la demande. Guidée par la demande, et vous verrez qu'on a commencé par la cohérence des politiques, mais tous les 4 priorités sont liées d'une certaine façon à cette cohérence-là. Parce que guidée par la demande, liée à l'action qui peut être faite également au niveau régional. Les États dans les pays doivent pouvoir être suffisamment informés pour qu'ils puissent aller eux-mêmes vers les institutions, que ce soit au niveau régional, au niveau international, et demander qu'on puisse les aider à intervenir. Mais il faut que ce soit guidé par la demande, parce que ce n'est que comme cela que l'appropriation est la meilleure et que les États comprennent que ce n'est pas une idée nouvelle qu'on leur impose, mais c'est une demande qui s'impose dans leur développement.
Thank you very much indeed. I did not say so, but please do shut off your mobile phones and etc. You can tweet. Thank you very much indeed. So you've focused on the policy coherence. You have to be prepared, better planning, as you said, Deputy Secretary General, good governance. I think resilience, you put it in connection with good governance, and I think that's very true. And the point that Cyril raised as well about how do you convince countries to be prepared if they haven't already been impacted by catastrophes in the past. I think those are very, very salient points. Barbara, these points, I'm sure that when you're in discussion with partner countries, the UNDP, these points must be high up on the agenda. So just give us an indication of how do you work with countries on implementing recovery?
Well, I'll start off by saying we work in partnership, and I'm going to link up with what the ASG has mentioned. But maybe before I do, just a couple of steps back, and thinking back as we were talking of a meeting we recently had in the ACP with the ambassadors, and hearing the frustration of an ambassador of one of the countries And you remember this conversation saying, well, the hurricanes strike our islands. It was a Pacific island in that case. And everybody responds rapidly on the humanitarian side. But then we strive to, beyond the, maybe first 10 days, to then get attention and to get support. And I have to say there was a lot of frustration in his voice and almost anger in that case. But I think there are positive things to pick up. First of all, we're discussing about this within the European Days of Development. We've discussed it with the DG on humanitarian issues, and we're in a partnership and we're talking about recovery. I think that is very important. Secondly, we've had conferences recently which have put recovery as the center of the discussion. And it's not just the Sendai, which we sometimes also strive to get to people's attention, but it's also the humanitarian summit that saw the link between the humanitarian and the development, and of course the SDGs. Now all of that obliges us to look at the implementation and to see how the different actors get involved. And also, if we're looking at the previous conferences, we used to talk about eventually reconstruction, and now we're talking about recovery. So it's not about things, it's also about people. And it's about getting the economy moving again, and about giving all the socioeconomic elements into the discussion, and looking at the political issues that also need to be involved in the process. And then, of course, we've talked about this partnership. And we've also mentioned that not only does it touch different actors within the society, but it requires us to get together and to support the exercise. And actually, we're sitting at this table today because in 2000, those of us who are there from the institutions, because in 2008, we decided to agree and to look at how together we could accompany from this multi-sectoral, more complex analysis, the EU, the World Bank, and the UN, and in this case, specifically UNDP, to sort of help the countries look at the disaster and assess what needed to be done, taking into account the short, medium, and longer term, and looking at the different aspects. So what is it that we're doing, and what do we need to emphasize? It is at looking at this complex set of issues that need to be addressed from the preparation, and so we've been working with different countries, sometimes on our own, sometimes together. We provide technical assistance because it is a very complex issue. We help the national governments come up with their national strategies or with sectoral strategies in some cases. In Africa, for example, we're working with 5 African countries with the support of Luxembourg and Japan. In other countries, such as Haiti, and we'll be looking at it, when the hurricane struck, we started looking at the early recovery and the recovery process by not just thinking that we needed to build big roads or big airports, but trying to get the livelihoods back to the people. We looked for issues such as cash intervention so that people had their own income and had access to the means of getting their own activity going, but then linking them up with the national and the local, because you were mentioning the regional and the national governments, but local governments also have a very important role in making sure that they do emphasize the community aspect, the human and people aspects, because it is about people, and it's about people losing their livelihoods, their assets, and making sure that they then once again become actors of their own development, and that the national governments are able to also get their economy going. If we're not able to get into the recovery, we will not gain the goals, the sustainable development goals. And there's an enormous risk of leaving people behind, because those who are in a vulnerable situation, if we don't invest in them, if we don't involve them in our national and global policies. And the last thing we do is of helping to mobilize the funds. So we help in the preparation, we help in helping the preventive part, the getting ready for eventual disasters. Very few countries have disasters that were not something that was likely to happen. You know, all of these SIDS, we know that these are the cases. The droughts, we now know that, you know, another El Niño is likely to happen. We know that floods will occur. We know that hurricanes will arrive. So we can prepare and we can reduce the vulnerabilities. We can make sure that our sectoral or budgets can take that into account. But then we need to help the governments recover and to take this recovery part with the human side, but also the sectoral planning. And then we need to help the governments mobilize the funding. And sometimes this is our biggest constraint, and it's perhaps one of the things that we now really need to concentrate on, because they need to have stable funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've actually pointed to a number of points that I think are very important. You know, Kristalina Georgieva, when she was the Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs, often said to us at Friends of Europe that, you know, the real challenge is getting people and the press and the media interested still in the long term. After a disaster, there's a media crush even. And then after that, it's very difficult to keep the level of interest going, maintain it. And thank you also for telling us about recovery. It's about people. It's not just reconstruction of houses. The importance of national, but also local authorities, regional authorities. And of course, the challenge of mobilizing funds. In a world weary, I have to say, of giving aid perhaps, of aid fatigue, perhaps even humanitarian fatigue. So we've already broached a number of very, very crucial policy issues already. Let's go to Nepal now, to Mr. Swarnim Wagle. Many of the things that Barbara has said, I'm sure you experienced it yourself, because Nepal was tragically struck by earthquakes in 2015, April and May. Biggest disaster in your country in 80 years, losses and destruction at a very large scale. What are the lessons that you've learned from that experience, including the positive lessons that you can share with us and that will take you forward in this new period? It's on.
Thank you. I think Nepal's reconstruction story is still unfolding. So, in fact, there's a dedicated session today at 4 o'clock in this room. So I invite everyone who is interested in this to join a fairly rich panel, a diverse panel. Including the CEO of the Reconstruction Authority, Dr. Pokhrel, who is here. Now, I was intimately involved in the early phases of responding to this immense disaster, which, as you rightly said, was probably one of the biggest events in the last century in Nepal's history. We had spectacular early success. We deviated a little in the interim because of political problems, but we're now trying very hard to put it back on track and give it added momentum. So that's where we stand 2 years on. And again, as I said, 4 o'clock, please be here if you want to know the details. Now, Nepal's experience so far, in my opinion, reaffirms this emerging consensus in the literature about the importance of a coordinated plan, nimble decision-making, and flexible financing that's on standby. So this is the emerging consensus, and this is what we saw happen in Nepal. So it's, if you like, a real evidence to back that consensus in this field. Wherever you had pre-agreed, pre-financed, rules-based arrangements in place, things worked relatively smoothly. Wherever there was no plan, there was no financing, and a lot of discretion vested in officials who didn't have that requisite authority, there was chaos. So this is the overarching lesson I'd like to take away from the Nepal's response. Now, you talked about the positive examples. I'm sure it's a mixed bag so far, but let me highlight some of the positive examples in responding to this disaster over the last 2 years. Now, it's helpful to break this complex journey into 3 parts. The first part is really about rescue and relief. The second is about early recovery, and the third one, which we're on now, is full-fledged reconstruction. Now, on rescue and relief, I think in Nepal, the initial triggers of an emergency, you know, all the protocols, they really worked well. That was because there was a plan in place. National Emergency Operations Center had been functional for the preceding 3 years. The cabinet met within 2 hours of this massive disaster. The chief secretary was at the National Emergency Operations Center within 25 minutes of the disaster. So these basic triggers, protocols really worked. You know, how do you manage dead bodies? You know, how do you deploy security forces in large numbers? How do you delineate open spaces? How do you quickly authorize the district disaster relief funds to come into use immediately Those things really worked. And I think that those protocols, having been in place a few years earlier, helped save thousands of lives. There was a spontaneous mobilization of volunteers, both nationally, and this was a new phenomenon of our diaspora. Our people who have traveled or who live abroad instantly mobilized. Hundreds, if not thousands, started to flock into the country the next day, organizing through the social media. So that was also a new thing that we saw in Nepal. The use of the internet, the use of the social media to organize, to group, regroup, deploy, and respond was simply fantastic. In the early recovery phase, this is when the development partners helped us prepare a very credible post-disaster needs assessment. I'm going to talk about this in the next session, so if you're interested in this, please stay behind as well. There was firm government leadership, there was highly participatory, a very comprehensive assessment that ended up producing a credible output, which was later ratified by the global community as well. And in that, within 2 months of the disaster, we held a very successful pledging conference. We called it the International Conference for Nepal's Reconstruction. We managed to secure 100% of the public funding that we requested, which I believe is a rare event in international circumstances of this kind. And finally, on reconstruction, I think we realized that the existing government apparatus would not be able to respond flexibly in a nimble fashion. The bureaucracy would be stifling. So we argued early on that we need an extraordinary mechanism to respond to this immense disaster. So we created the National Reconstruction Authority. That in the original design, it was subsequently diluted and weakened, but in the original design, it was supposed to be a very strong entity that would be empowered to take on fast-track provisions when it came to procurement, when it came to land acquisition, when it came to environmental clearances, when it came to grievance redressals. And those things were put in place, and it would have been headed by a highly empowered cabinet rank chief executive officer. So all those things really helped. But before that entity sort of came into operation, it was made sure that there would be no institutional vacuum. So the National Planning Commission, which has been in existence for over 60 years, was charged with filling this void before this fully authorized entity came into legal standing. So these are, I think, some of the positive examples that one can take away from the Nepali experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bagle. Indeed, many experiences and lessons seem to have been learned. I think the point you've made also about the diaspora and the use of the social media, I think this was a new thing you saw, and that I think is going to be something that is going to be quite important in recovery, resilience, and reconstruction. Thank you very much, and I'm sure the sessions that follow, you can dig deeper into some of these points that you've made. Let's turn now to Haiti, and tragically, Haiti also has been struck by several major disasters over the past 10 years. Mr. Florent, I was wondering if you could share with us some of your experiences and how you've learned how to do things better in the future. Thank you.
Je salue la modératrice, je salue leurs excellences ministres du panel, les chers collègues qui ont parlé d'or, je salue toute l'assistance. Je dois dire que c'est vraiment un honneur pour moi d'être associé à ce grand débat d'importance capitale autour de la résilience, de la question des risques, du relèvement vers le développement. S'il y a lieu de parler des leçons tirées d'expériences et qu'on prend Haïti en exemple, je peux dire que Haïti a une situation toute particulière. Si je me réfère à l'indice mondial sur le changement climatique publié en 2016, Haïti est le 3e pays le plus touché par les événements climatiques. Il y a aussi lieu de dire que si je mets ça dans le cadre par comparaison au niveau des Caraïbes, c'est le pays qui subit le plus grand nombre de catastrophes par kilomètre carré. Il y a lieu aussi de dire que 56 désastres sont survenus dans le pays et ceux-ci sont reconnus internationalement. Si on se réfère au XXe siècle, 20 catastrophes majeures Et pendant la dernière décennie, il y a 4 qui ont ravagé le pays. Il faut dire aussi que 96% de la population haïtienne vivent constamment sous la menace d'au moins 2 aléas. Ceci nous pousse à réfléchir. Il y a lieu de se rappeler que le monde a été choqué en 2010. Un tremblement de terre de magnitude 7,2 a tué 220 000 personnes et provoqué des destructions d'une valeur équivalent à 120% du PIB national. Ceci nous pousse à réfléchir, parce que nous sommes dans une trajectoire sismique, dans une trajectoire cyclonique, dans un bassin sismique. Le cyclone m'a tué dernièrement. Selon l'évaluation des besoins après catastrophe réalisée avec les partenaires clés d'Haïti, tels le PNUD, l'Union européenne, la Banque mondiale, on a pu remarquer que le cyclone Mathieu a touché 2,1 millions de personnes affectées. Il y a cette affectation s'étend sur le PIB national à un niveau de 32%. Ceci a provoqué des dommages et des pertes de l'ordre de 2,78 milliards de dollars américains et les besoins sont également évalués selon le Post-Disaster Needs Assessment à 2,72 milliards de dollars. Il y a un constat. Le constat que nous avons fait au niveau du gouvernement, c'est que la non-prise en compte des risques dans les politiques publiques, ça conforte la vulnérabilité de la population face aux aléas climatiques. Aussi, en revanche, je dois dire, moi je comprends que le risque ne compromet pas vraiment le développement, dans la mesure où on l'intègre dans les politiques publiques, où on en tient compte dans la conception et la mise en œuvre des instruments de planification. Je vais prendre un exemple d'un pays, le Japon. Le Japon, tout le monde le sait, est exposé aux risques sismiques et volcaniques. Mais le développement ne s'en trouve pas compromis parce que les autorités gouvernementales en font une très bonne gestion et intègrent les risques dans leur politique publique. Je peux dire à cette phase que le risque n'est pas une fatalité. Il permet au contraire de mieux planifier et de penser le développement. En guise de leçon concrète, je peux dire que je dois toucher plusieurs aspects. Et nous autres, en Haïti, aujourd'hui, on a un climat politique stable, un président élu dès le premier tour, légitime, un gouvernement qui a bénéficié de la confiance du Parlement. J'étais ministre sous l'ancien gouvernement et reconduit aujourd'hui par le nouveau gouvernement. Mais je dois dire que cette évaluation des besoins après catastrophe que s'est approprié le nouveau gouvernement a permis cette continuité pour aller dans le sens de l'intégration des risques dans les politiques publiques. Et à cet effet, nous sommes en train de voir comment prévenir et faire la gestion des risques de manière systématique. Et la prévention et la gestion devront être déclinées sur les plans national, régional, communal et local, et ceux-ci doivent être appropriés par la population. Nous sommes en train de continuer avec ce qu'on appelle la cartographie des risques sismiques, cycloniques et climatiques. Nous avons en Haïti un centre national d'information géospatiale dont le directeur général est dans la salle, qui est là pour répertorier l'ensemble des risques, suivant un schéma de plan communal de développement, plan d'urbanisme, plan de prévention des risques, de réduction des risques, en vue de mieux penser l'aménagement du territoire. Et là, je dois ici poser cette problématique. On a un pays, il a parlé, celui qui a parlé, mon collègue qui a parlé de l'ACP, près de 40 PMA, mais beaucoup sont dans la trappe de l'extrême pauvreté. Et aujourd'hui, le gouvernement a un choix, soit de financer, de voir comment faire reculer la pauvreté, et est-ce qu'on va mettre l'argent au préalable dans les instruments de planification? 50 millions de dollars américains pour tout le pays pour doter de PCD, de plans d'urbanisme, de plans de prévention de risques. Or, le gouvernement généralement pense que ces 50 millions de dollars américains peuvent mieux financer l'agriculture. Or, financer des projets sans tenir compte de la prise en compte des risques, ceci se veut un préalable à tout investissement. Et c'est pourquoi moi je dis qu'avec l'appui du PNUD et un financement de l'Union européenne, le ministère de la Planification, dont je suis le titulaire, a élaboré ce guide méthodologique de la prévention des risques. Et je peux vous dire que c'est un instrument capital. Au cours du passage du cyclone Mathieu, les autorités départementales et communales en ont fait usage. Et un endroit qui s'appelle Dame-Marie, qui a été dévasté complètement, détruit, le système productif anéanti, mais zéro mort, parce qu'ils ont appliqué les plans proposés dans le guide méthodologique, financé par le PNUD, l'Union européenne, la Banque mondiale. Ces plans de prévention sont d'importance capitale. Et c'est pourquoi moi je pense que je fais appel aussi à un statut différencié. On sait bien d'organiser ce panel aujourd'hui autour de la résilience, autour du relèvement. Mais j'ai pris acte de ce qu'a dit ma collègue ici à ma gauche, qui a parlé de la problématique de la mobilisation des ressources. Vous êtes en train de motiver l'humanité aujourd'hui dans cette conférence pour mieux planifier la résilience, pour mieux faire reculer la vulnérabilité, pour mieux prendre en compte les risques dans les politiques publiques, ce qui nous réfère au principe d'intégration dans les conventions de Rio sur l'environnement et le développement. Mais croyez-moi, un État qui se trouve dans la trappe de l'extrême pauvreté a besoin aussi que la communauté internationale, en raison de son statut différencié, traite de la mobilisation des ressources dans une autre conférence également. Moi, j'en profite pour soulever cette question, parce que si on tient compte de 2,78 milliards de dollars américains pour le relèvement post-Mathieu, un pays dans l'extrême pauvreté, comment va-t-il pouvoir procéder si vous, au nom de cette coopération internationale, qui est un principe cardinal du système des Nations Unies, on ne se donne pas la main pour essayer de voir la mobilisation des ressources, certes à l'échelle nationale, à l'échelle internationale, pour voir comment essayer de reculer le spectre hideux de l'extrême pauvreté. Je dois dire, pour finir, que Haïti regorge d'énormes potentialités et de richesses. 1771 km de côte, ce qui est favorable à l'économie bleue pour transformer la situation des peuples à partir de l'exploitation des ressources de la mer. Nous avons la plus grande station balnéaire des Caraïbes, l'Abadi. Nous avons le plus grand parc industriel des Caraïbes, le parc de Caracol. Les plus célèbres lieux historiques de la première République noire du monde. Ce qui peut attirer l'investissement, ce qui constitue un cadre d'attractivité économique. Mais malheureusement, on est confronté à cela. Aujourd'hui, en guise de leçon, moi, en tant que ministre de la Planification, j'ai fait insérer dans le budget national une ligne pour tenir compte des instruments de planification, plans d'urbanisme, plans communaux de développement, plans de prévention des risques. Mais ceci ne peut être qu'un préalable, ne peut être qu'une contrepartie à cette attente de l'aide externe. Je pense que nous sommes en train de faire beaucoup de choses. Notamment, nous sommes en train d'investir dans la préparation et la coordination de la réponse en cas de catastrophe. Doter le pays de systèmes d'alerte sur le plan national et local. Renforcer la communication, il l'a dit, la sensibilisation sur les risques. Renforcer la gouvernance de la gestion des risques et des désastres pour mieux penser le développement et pour mieux projeter cette République comme pays émergent à l'horizon de 2030, conformément aux objectifs de développement durable. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for making these points. And I think the point you made about political governments having to choose at one point where they invest, whether it's going to be in long-term development or recovery and resilience plans, I think that is a dilemma that many face in these days. And thank you also for highlighting once again, as others have done, the importance of good governance and ownership by the people of these plans. So thank you very much indeed. Excellency Mr. Mekonnen, also from Ethiopia, once again, I mean, what we really need to know from you is lessons learned, good lessons learned, and what you would not do again, because tragically, many Ethiopian cities are also affected by flooding, water scarcity, fires, landslides, and earthquakes. So, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to learn from the international experience regarding the disaster reduction, risk reduction, and prevention mechanisms. As you know, the Ethiopian economy is performing good for the last more than a decade of years. It is recording rapid growth, and it is also trying to make inclusive, to make it shared growth. However, there are lots of accumulated problems, including those in urban centers. Poverty is the biggest problem in the country. That is the source of all of the problems, all of the hazards, all of the damages. So we are mobilizing the public against this poverty. It starts from the rural, and it also includes the urban centers. So our urban centers are vulnerable for flood, as stated already. And also recently we have been affected by landslide, rubbish slide, that has really catastrophic effects on the public living in the area. So lots of damages have been occurred. In this regard, we are mobilizing the public, we are organizing the public to participate in reducing these kinds of risks, and then to prevent from these risks. The Ethiopian government has established their agency at national level, at regional level, and also it is pressurizing the cities to establish their DRM units at city and town levels. So to make aware the public as a whole, the public bodies to make an integrated effort to incorporate the disaster risk management plans as the part of their plan. So we're trying to cope up with the challenges, despite a number of challenges. We have to work hard in identifying the problems, in expecting the risks, and so what measures to be taken. In general, we are trying to prepare ourselves ahead of the time, ahead of the problems, so as to reduce the damages and the losses. In any case, we have lots of things to learn. We have lots of things to work. Ethiopian cities and towns are vulnerable for lots of things, including floods and fire, because the infrastructure, the planning are still very low, very poor. We have to work hard on that areas. In this regard, we have started a program years before. That program is supported by the World Bank, and it is really very effective in creating employment for the youth and creating wealth for the poor portion of the society by through the development process of infrastructure and expanding roads using cobblestones or other mechanisms, and also drainage schemes. Systems are also developed with the support of this fund. So we have to expand the lessons and the experiences we got from this, and also from the international experiences. We are also ready to work with global partners. Thank you so much.
So, Cyril Muller, you've been listening to quite a few of your colleagues and the practitioners as well, talking about lessons learned going forward, what they would do differently, what they would do better, what they would not do. Your comments?
First of all, I want to thank my fellow panelists. I think they shared with us very valuable experiences. But I think also what we heard in this first part of the panel is clearly that we've come a long way over the last 15 years. Because I think the emphasis that was put on planning for disaster, on building resilience, is very much came out very strongly from the experiences. I would like to comment maybe on 3 areas. The first one is around financial mechanisms. I think this was emphasized very much as well. I remember sitting in Sendai when it was, if I remember well, it was Cyclone Pam, which hit at the time Vanuatu. And Vanuatu had been one of the countries that had subscribed to a facility for the Pacific Islands. So within 2 weeks, they got a disbursement of money that helped them with immediate response. And I want to use that example as something to say that when you have the mobilization of countries, and we heard testimonies today into this, is the solidarity of people, the willingness to help, the immediate availability now. So the quick response element, we've made very big progress, and I think we need to make sure that we nurture that initial response with adequate financing, with making sure that the institutions that have been created and empowered have a chance to deliver on their mandate. So that's my first comment on what we heard, because I think that is extremely powerful. The second comment I will have is, if we look back and we look forward, I think we have made good progress around the immediate crisis response. We've made some progress on crisis, on reconstruction. We've built a number of tools. But I think the theme of today's conference, which is really the recovery phase, is by far the most challenging element. And I think the examples from Haiti, from Nepal, really validated that. Into that, I want to maybe highlight one element. When we look at crisis recovery or disaster recovery, I believe we need to make sure that policymakers, leaders of countries, see recovery from disaster as important as recovery from an economic crisis, as important as conflict elements. And I think it is looking towards comprehensive solutions and embodying recovery, resilient recovery, into public policy, as the minister from Haiti mentioned before, into long-term plans. I want to also maybe my third comment around crisis recovery. If you fail in recovery, you actually risk something that's immensely important, which is you risk to jeopardize the trust between citizens, governments, and communities. Because it is during the phase of recovery, after the immediate drama, that people have the urge to take action and to make a difference. And if we're unable to respond in that phase, what you may lose is not only weaken the recovery, you may endanger your capacity over time to put in place policies and institutions that can be sustainable over time. That's what I wanted to share with you on listening to my co-panelists today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gnasunu had told me earlier on that he had to leave at 10:15, and we are now at 10:20, so we don't have much time. So the second round of questions that I had foreseen, admirably, I think, with the organizers ahead of time, actually, I'm going to drop that in the bin. There's no time for massive responses. And I'm going to go back to all of you panelists. And we've talked about many things here, and many have struck me as being really different from what I've heard in the past. So we're obviously moving forward in a discussion that needs, I guess, more policy insights, and obviously you've pointed to many challenges. But I'm going to ask all of you, and Cyril, you've already sort of set out your vision for the future, but I'm going to ask all of you to give me a very few minutes, an idea of what you would like this whole issue of recovery, reconstruction, rehabilitation, where would you like it to be in the next 5 to 10 years? When you meet again, for a discussion like this, where would you like to look back and say, that's what we did, and that's what we're really proud of? Monique, please.
Thank you. Many things to say, but very little time indeed. Now, on that, I would like to pick up what our colleague from Nepal said, and in particular in mentioning the need to have a coordinated plan. I think this is vital, and this is absolutely instrumental to a good recovery and to a good response. This is what we have been doing in the EU with the civil protection mechanism, where we pool and coordinate resources from our member states, be it assets or expertise, technical assistance, so that we have the most adequate coordinated response when a disaster hits, either in the EU or outside of the EU, because the civil protection mechanism can be called, and was called in Haiti or in Nepal at the time, to response to disasters by international organization or the country that has been hit for that. So I think this is something we notice every time we have a disaster, and the lessons we learn from that, how the good coordination and the perfect knowledge of what can be used and how and in which way and how quickly is vital to good response. Then when it comes to the recovery phase, and to respond to your question, I think for what I would like to see in 10 years' time on that, and even before 10 years, is that all governments, all public authorities integrate risk in their public policies. This is something that we all need to own at all levels, international, European, national, even local level, because it starts with the local level. And if some countries have a better response, it's often because their local communities are much more aware of the risk and much better prepared. So I would like to see more ownership of that and a better integration into the public policies that has been mentioned before, that it is something that has to be owned by the government, and that a good response requests also a good governance by every country is involved at all levels. And this is particularly vital. Then,
can I interrupt you with a question, Monique? So I remember a couple of months ago, you came to one of Friends of Europe conferences, and it was about the role of women in humanitarian disasters. So could you just give us very, very briefly, because time is running out, how important it is to engage with women in this issue, as leaders, not as victims?
Absolutely. And being a woman, I'm very happy to answer this question, because I think those who care mostly for their families, for their communities, and those who have to deal with the day-to-day management of their housing, of their families, of the often agriculture in some countries, are the women. So I think they are key drivers for promoting awareness, prevention, for coordinating a response, because they are usually well organized also. So I think this is vital for me to include, as I said, local communities, but in particular women into that. And thank you for raising the point. I often don't dare always mentioning women.
No, we should
be more forceful on that.
Yeah.
And
no, you are.
I do think this is, they are certainly one of the key drivers for improving the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Monique. Mr. Wagle, let's have your vision, crystal ball vision for what things will be like when things are really doing well, please.
Thank you. I think I'd like to see 3 things done at the national level and 2 things internationally. Nationally, we all need to do a lot of homework, including in Nepal, of course, to legally undergird policies and institutions. You know, in Nepal, we're still stuck with a 35-year-old law on disaster management. You know, so updating the legal sort of architecture of disaster response is extremely important. The second is internalizing and mainstreaming sort of disaster risk reduction measures in everything that we do, from school, university curriculum, to building codes, recognizing that disaster response is multifaceted. So you rightly talked about the gender angle, livelihoods, issues of heritage. So this multifaceted, I think, part of disaster response has to be internalized. The deployment of the digital, tools and media and new partnerships that I mentioned earlier. The ancillary sort of supporting reforms, as I mentioned, the engineering profession, building codes, rethinking urbanization, the way we view our open spaces, the importance of open spaces. I think all these things are extremely important to be pursued with vigor on the national theater. Internationally, there has to be greater balance between ex-ante risk management and ex-post risk management. So this bifurcation between preparation and coping, we must redress the asymmetry that exists right now. If you look at the World Disasters Report and a lot of the contemporary literature, this asymmetry or imbalance is really unacceptable. That has to be, there's a lot of homework done on that. Greater knowledge about risks, how do we protect to lower the probabilities of risks, and when protection is not adequate, how do we build in insurance mechanisms that we've seen work in the Caucasus, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific. So those sort of international sharing of best practices has to be
Right.
so
I'm going to have to ask you to...
and the final thing is on the reform of the international aid architecture.
Okay.
It's broken right now. There's long gestation period when it comes to designing new programs or large-scale programs. The budget cycles are very rigid, and this problem of fungibility, shifting resources from here to there without adding any additional funds.
Right.
So these problems have to be fixed.
And this could possibly be among the first three priorities, international aid architecture. Thank you very much. Minister Florent, also, if I could just ask all of you now to be quite brief, because there's refreshments and then the conversation continues. So please, Monsieur Florent.
Je souscris en fait à tout ce qui a été recommandé. Je reprends ce qu'a dit mon collègue de droite. Il faut que les États pensent le relèvement, le développement. Le relèvement après une catastrophe, c'est comme un relèvement après un conflit armé. Il faut que les autorités puissent assurer le leadership. Et je suis tout aussi d'accord qu'il faut inscrire la stratégie de relèvement dans les grands chantiers de développement à long terme. Et je n'ai pas besoin de retourner sur la question de risques et de leur intégration dans les politiques publiques, puisque ça, c'est incontournable. Mais il a pris l'exemple de Vanuatu. Et effectivement, c'est un exemple où l'on peut dire qu'il y avait eu une mobilisation de ressources. Mais si, comparativement, je prends l'exemple d'Haïti, après le tremblement de terre du 12 janvier, il y avait des appels à levée de fonds où on a les promesses et engagements, c'était l'ordre de 12 milliards de dollars américains. Mais la presse internationale, américaine notamment, a reconnu qu'un cinquième de cet avoir n'a pu atterrir. Donc moi, je pense qu'il faut remettre sur la table la question de mobilisation des ressources. Il faut tenir compte du statut différencié des États. Donc, je vous ai donné l'exemple clair pour terminer. Un pays qui se trouve dans la trappe de l'extrême pauvreté, 50 millions de dollars américains. Va-t-on financer les instruments de planification ou va-t-on reconstruire de la même manière? Donc, on s'est trouvé dans une problématique. Je sais que le PNUD, Martine Thierry qui est là, en est témoin, la Banque mondiale, l'Union européenne, aide dans la conception, l'élaboration des instruments de planification. Mais ça ne suffit pas. Certes, moi, en tant que ministre du Plan, j'ai mis de l'argent cette année dans le budget pour pouvoir financer les instruments de planification. Ce que moi, je vous demande ici, dans cette conférence mondiale, c'est de voir comment vous pouvez appuyer davantage les États selon leur statut différencié, les États PMA comme Haïti, à mettre de l'argent pour les instruments de planification. Ceci est un préalable à l'investissement majeur.
Thank you. A very good and very strong message and a very salient point to make. Differentiation between countries. Thank you very much. Minister Mekonnen, please.
Thank you again. In the coming 5 and 10 years, we are expecting to build a capacity that can withstand disasters and other related damages. So building the capacity of various stakeholders is one of the main strategies, including the public and the private stakeholders, and also building the government bodies in this regard, the technical capability, know-how, technological supports, and the resources as well. At the time of recovery or at the time of disaster, that needs huge resources. So these bodies should be facilitated with sufficient capacities of resources, including finance and technological support like firefighting, flood fighting, and similar items. So we have to build our capacity in many aspects: knowledge, human resource, technology, and also awareness of totally understanding the nature and the ability to forecast hazards in the future, disasters in the future. So how to tackle these kinds of damages, these kinds of problems. So awareing the whole people and also engaging the mass as already started in natural resource conservation and rehabilitation efforts of the whole country. Because whether it is cities or towns, they are affected by flood, fire, like that, but it is related with the natural resource degradation. So we have to revitalize the environment.
Right.
We have to reforest the environment
Right.
so that resources could be conserved and flood hazards could be minimized. We have to create strong institutions in this regard towards meeting the objectives set by the national policy and enabling society as a whole. It's the basic direction. And collaborative, integrated engagements are the main solutions. We have to work together. We have to enable the public at large. We have to mobilize resources. We have to equip those engaged in disaster management and recovery efforts.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So investment in environment and also building capacity and strong institutions. Barbara, final word from you about how you see please, could you? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly. First of all, 5 or 10 years down the line, but also tomorrow, because let's not forget that many things are happening. So what I would like to see is in the disasters that we know will happen in this next year. The Niño probably, things are happening in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So what I would like to see is that we, on a day-to-day basis, implement it. My biggest desire would be that we make sure that recovery is not just a fad, and that we don't go back to talking just about reconstruction of big infrastructure, but that recovery really becomes part of our work at the national level and internationally. We need to make sure that in the successive conferences that take place, we don't fall back to things that are more natural in some of our environments. We operate in silos very often. You have the humanitarian money and you have the development money, and some of them, and most of them, are not flexible. So we need to see how we are able to break those silos and how we are able to work together and put an aspect of flexibility. Now, part of this flexibility we've seen in the humanitarian world, and as a colleague from the World Bank was saying, is of having predictable funds available that can be rapidly mobilized and can be implemented with agility. On the recovery side, there isn't that much yet. I think if I were to sort of have an objective, is that we are able to set up an architecture that is able to invest in recovery, be available and rapidly mobilized. And that, of course, you know, it would be appropriate to the different kinds of environment. So I think it also comes back to the substantive, it comes to the partnership, because it will only take place if we are able to work together in the sense beyond, you know, you were asking about gender. UN Women is going to be in some of the panels in these 2 days. That wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. It's there now because it's now about recovery, it's about the people, it's about the different infrastructures, and it's about us continuing this process and consolidating it in the implementation process. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Cyril, very, very briefly.
You know, we all attend many conferences, but I have to confess that the previous World Reconstruction conferences were successful in improving our toolbox and our effectiveness in responding to disasters. So my wish would be that when we convene the next time, we will have made definite progress in 2 areas. One is to build a stronger toolbox, a more effective toolbox to promote resilient recovery. We're still, and we heard that today in the panel. And my second wish is to make sure that within resilient recovery, we put peoples first and we put livelihood first, because I think we've made great progress in the world, in assessments, in the physical side, but I think in protecting and enhancing livelihoods, we're still a long way to go. That would be my wish. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed to all the panelists for their very informative and, I have to say, insightful observations. I'm not going to wrap up what has been a fascinating discussion, but I have to say I've been struck by some things that in my job as a think tanker, as somebody working on development, have really made an impact on me. I think what you said, Barbara, about recovery is not just a fad. It should now become part of our policies in our national plans, in our development plans. What you also said, Cyril, about how recovery from disasters should be as important as recovery from financial crisis. I think this is a very strong message to send to our governments. Mr. Wagley, you made some very good points about how the diaspora and social media is becoming involved in what up to now has been a very institutional and politically driven agenda, but it's coming from the people now. And as part of many diasporas, people here, I'm sure what you said really, really resonates. Monique, you made some very, very good points about also the role of women in this experience that we have. We have to keep it on the political agenda is the message I think that all of you have sent. We have to keep it very high up. We have to break the silos, and we have to work in partnerships, including, and I think this point has been made by all of you, with the private sector. I think this cannot be done by institutions alone. So please join me in thanking our panelists for their very, very insightful observations. I wish you a continuation. I think there's a coffee break now, but you have 2 days of interesting discussions ahead of you. Thank you.